Hey everyone, my name is Michael and I am a biologist with the San Mateo County Department of Agriculture. And I'm here to talk about honeybee colony registration. So this will be a really quick presentation. I don't want to take up too much of your time. All right. So California law actually requires all beekeepers to register their honeybee locations with the local agricultural commissioner's office within 30 days of establishing the apiary. And this is actually in the California Food and Agricultural Code. The agricultural commissioner's office would just be the San Mateo County Department of Agriculture. And so it is part of the law to register your honeybee hives with the county. Doing so, however, is really simple. There's a website called BeeWhere, and the link is on the top, beewherecalifornia.com. And it's a pretty simple process to register where your hives are located using their interface. So you don't have to call us or do anything too convoluted. It's just really simple to enter your information through the website. Something that you should note is that all the colony locations are strictly confidential and they're only able to be seen by the Department of Agriculture in San Mateo County, as well as the California Department of Food and Agriculture. So it is very secure and your honeybee colony locations won't be available to anybody else if they ask. So one good reason to register with the county is that it helps our department as well as the California Department of Agriculture manage bee-related concerns. So an example of that would be American foul brood. So around fall of 2019, there was actually a couple of cases of American foul brood in San Mateo County. And so just being able to know where the honeybee colonies are located and the densities of those colonies will just help us manage those concerns much more effectively and easily. So this also facilitates communication between beekeepers and pesticide applicators. So I know a lot of you are not located near any agricultural fields, but some of you might be if you're somewhere near maybe Half Moon Bay or Pescadero on the coast. So a reason that BeeWhere could be very useful is that if an applicator uses pesticides that are toxic to bees on a blossoming plant, they actually have to notify the beekeepers who have hives within a 1 mile radius of the application site. So these applicators are able to use the BeeWhere program to see if there are any hives within that 1 mile radius. So they won't actually know the location of your honeybee colonies. They'll just know that they are somewhere within that 1 mile radius. And so they'll be able to contact you if you indicate that you would like to be contacted in case pesticides are being used in that case. In that scenario, they'll just give you the time and place of the application, the crop they're applying it to, the acreage of the crop, the method of application, the type of pesticide being used, as well as the pesticide dose. So how much does it cost to register? Right now, we are waiving all fees associated with hive registration. In other counties, I believe if you have 10 or greater hives, it's a $10 fee, which isn't too much, but right now it costs $0 to register. So you don't have to worry about that. And how long does your registration last? They're valid for the current year. So each registration lasts for 1 year and they have to be renewed every year afterwards, preferably before January 1st. So if you already registered for the year 2020, I think it's pretty simple for you to just log onto your account and there should be a button to just simply renew your registration for 2021. And when do you need to update your registration? You have to update it within 72 hours. Basically, if you ever change the number of colonies at a specific location within the county, or if you move it to a different county, or if you move it to a different state, meaning you would just change your colony count to 0. This is just so that it keeps our database as up to date as possible, so we know which colonies are around certain areas. And again, it's very simple to register. You can go to BeeWhereCalifornia.com. And if you would like additional help, you can also go to our website for the Department of Agriculture. You can just Google San Mateo County Department of Agriculture, and it should be the first link. And then you click on Agricultural Programs, Apiary Registration, and we have a guide here, a step-by-step guide that allows you to register for the BeeWhere website. So it should be, there's a lot of resources to help you out in order to register. And yeah, that's all I have for you guys. Hopefully you're able to register your colonies as soon as possible, and that will just really help out our department a lot.
Michael, we had a couple of questions. One was from Wolfgang. If I registered last year, do I have to re-register this year? I believe you you covered that. You just need to log into the same website and click to update your registration for 2021, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it should be pretty simple to just click on. I believe there should be a button that lets you renew it for the next year. So if your colony counts are still the same and at the same location, you don't really have to do anything else to re-register for the current year.
And one of our members, Elodie, also had a little bit of feedback. She says, since lots of people lose one or more hives in January, February, perhaps it would be better to require registration in a different month than January, just since, you know, the hives, sometimes people don't know whether or not they have active hives right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's actually in the California law says January 1st, so we actually aren't able to change that. It's just part of what they encoded in the law. But if you do have more colonies that you know of, like in the spring when beekeeping is a bit more active, you can definitely just easily update your locations and colony counts on the BeeWhere website.
And Celia said that we did receive an email that Santa Clara is waiving the fee, but they didn't say for how many hives. So if you're in Santa Clara, you may want to get some guidance from their ag department about how many hives qualify for registering for free. And Elodie also said that she seems to be having problem finding the 2021 registration within BeeWhere. So Michael, if people have trouble, is there somebody they can reach out to for technical support with the website?
I believe you can try emailing me or contacting our department, and we can see if we can help you figure out how to find the renewal for 2021. Is that because you've already registered for 2020 and they're trying to renew it, or they're just trying to completely start a new registration?
Elodie, if you want to comment in the here, I can just enable your ability to talk. Just a second. All right, Elodie, you can unmute now if you want.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I was just looking at the site, and if I go to the site, it says registration for beekeepers. This is all fine and well. And it says for the 2020 bloom season, beekeepers can register. And then it says for 2020 registration and movement notification, blah, 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 blah. And there doesn't say anything about 2021.
Is that just, is that on like the splash screen when you just bring up BeeWhere.com?
BeeWhere.com, register here. I clicked on registration.
Okay.
It might be that they just haven't updated that splash screen and they still have it saying 2020, but it's probably going to be valid for 2021 if you do register on the website.
Yeah, if you log in, Elodie, you should be able to see. I just did this a couple weeks ago, and it does have 2021 once you log in. I do see that the informational screen is not updated though. I see what you're talking about. I'll ping it to Michael. Cool. Any other questions?
I had one. This is Peter. We all want to be good law-abiding citizens. What's the stick that will help ensure that that's how we actually behave?
So there are, starting in 2021, actually, we are allowed to enforce these laws, and we can enact civil penalties that might result in a fine if you don't register your colonies. We're trying really hard not to have to do this, and we just really want to foster compliance with everybody. But theoretically, we could actually do a civil penalty if we find out that there are colonies somewhere and they haven't been registered with our county.
And lastly, Tim did ask, what about natural hives? So unmanaged hives. If you have a tree with bees in it, I'm guessing that does not need to be registered. It's just managed hives.
Yeah, it's just managed colonies in an apiary.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Michael. With that, I think we can move on to our main speaker for the night.
All right, thanks for having me. And if
Thanks
you have
for
any
coming.
questions, feel free to contact our department or just email me if you saw my email from before.
Cool. I can send out, Michael, you emailed on the list, so everybody should have your email. Perfect. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
All right. Larissa, you should, I made you a co-host, so you should be able to turn on your camera and your microphone and also present your screen when you're ready.
Okay. Hi there.
Hi.
I'm guessing you can see me okay?
Yes, we can see your camera now, not your presentation yet, if you were presenting that.
Okay. 1 second here. All right, can everyone see my presentation?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. Well, hi everybody, I'm Larissa. I am a beekeeper here on the Big Island of Hawaii, and I'm going to be talking about things you can do with your beeswax, how you can harvest it, render it, clean it, all of those fun and super messy things. A little bit about me. I am a beekeeper and a graphic designer. I actually started keeping bees when I was living in Philly as a graphic designer, and started working for some commercial apiaries part-time while I was working as a freelance graphic designer. I ended up actually working for bee farms for the last 7 years full-time and doing, starting to build up my own apiary, which is called Be Happy. And I also have a podcast called The Buzz About Bees and working on some other side projects. But at my own bee farm, I started working on, I mostly do honeycomb sales. There's a lot of chefs and resorts out here in Hawaii that purchase our comb honey. And I also started doing a lot of candles and beeswax body products. And that was really because I worked for an apiary with 4,000 hives, and I worked for another apiary with like 130. And I just saw, you know, the forklifts and the trucks and the employees and the warehouse with the barrels full of 600 and whatever pounds of honey. And I was like, I never, you know, want to do that. That's not something that, I don't want that stress and all of that investment in money. So I started working on other ways that I could make an income from my honey and products from the hive. Because, you know, you don't make a ton of money as a professional beekeeper, especially working for someone else's farm. And making these candles and stuff was a really great way to do it. So first, you know, you want to make sure that you're doing things the right way. And so if you use beeswax for candles, as far as I'm aware, it's okay. Even if you're using wax that was in the hive when there was a treatment, you know, I haven't been able to get a straight answer from the companies that produce these treatments, but as far as I'm aware, it's okay. But when you're using it for those beeswax wraps or cosmetic use, you know, and any kind of lotions and chapsticks and all of those things, you really want to make sure you're using the wax that was harvested from your hive when there were no treatments in there whatsoever. And if you do use a treatment, I just don't even pull anything from the brood box that I would use for cosmetic use. And, you know, just like the cappings from using your extractor and those things, because beeswax is really porous. As somebody who harvests comb honey, even I have to be very sparing with my use of the smoker, because that can make your honeycomb have a smoky taste to it. So it just really absorbs all those things, and it's not safe for use. So now that we get that part out of the way, a big question is, you know, where are you going to get all this wax from? If you're making candles, you're going to need a lot of wax if you're just going to use a candle mold and make it a solid beeswax candle. If you don't have a ton of wax, you can always make the container candles, because they're half wax, half oil. And then if you just have, like, you know, a teensy amount of wax, body products are a great way that you can use your beeswax, because it's primarily other oils and butters and just a teeny little bit of beeswax. But overall, most of your wax is probably going to come from the cappings when you're extracting. But if you're ever removing some of that old dark comb in your hive, you can melt that down. If you use foundation, it's a lot easier if you leave your frame in a sunny spot to soften it up before you scrape it off of the foundation. And, you know, if you don't have enough wax, you can always go to another beekeeper. The farm I worked for, they sold 30-pound blocks for pretty cheap, actually. And people would buy them and make their body products from them. I've used the wax that was getting destroyed by wax moth, and actually even some of the wax that had small hive beetle larvae on them and stuff, if it's not too far along gone. And I use that for, you know, the candles. I wouldn't use it for the cosmetic grade wax. But all that stuff can get melted down and used for a whole bunch of things. So first you need to render the wax, and there's different ways that you can do this. What I do is I use a slow cooker. So what I do is I take a slow cooker, and these things are great because you can find them at most thrift stores, you know, yard sales, or you can get one at the store. And you want to make sure you're using one of those as opposed to a crock pot, because it has the temperature gauge on it. You don't want to put it up too high, or else it'll you know, you could burn your wax. So if you use the slow cooker, you have the temperature gauge on it. I usually set it to 200. Some people set it even lower because they're afraid they're going to burn their wax, but I haven't really had trouble at 200. And you really just take all that comb that you have, the wax, the cappings from your extractor. You can rinse them off if you like first to make it a little bit less of a honey that you're extracting in the process later on. But you just take your comb and throw it in the crock pot, fill it up halfway with water, halfway with the comb, and just let it heat up. So it's a little bit of a two-part process. So here's the materials that you would need for the full process. But what you do is you fill the slow cooker up with the honeycomb and water, and you just let it melt. You have to, so many times go out there and push the comb down if it's floating to the top too much. I've found the comb with a lot of the propolis casings and stuff, if you're pulling some from the brood section, they like to float to the top. So just push them down, and this way just take a little bit longer, but it's a lot safer, and you can do it outside. And I personally do not like to melt my wax in the house. I could never find a lot of good information about this, but my boss had always told me, he's a 4th generation beekeeper, and he always said, do not make candles inside unless you are in an incredibly well ventilated room. So I always recommend the slow cooker just because you can do it in your garage or your shed. If your bees are on your property, you know, you want it somewhere that the bees can't get into, or you're going to have a lot of bees around. But I like to keep it outside the house so that you don't have that beeswax scent inside your home. And so once it's all melted, the water and the comb, you just shut it off and you let it harden. Once it hardens, all that wax is a solid block on the top, and then you have the water down below, and it is, you know, just like a honey, dirty water and other kinds of debris down there. So you can, you remove the water, you rinse off that wax block and you heat it back up again. But now you just have that solid wax block in your slow cooker. And you will let that melt until it's, you want it to be at least 150 degrees, but you just let it go for a few hours until it melts. I'm going to stop the, can you guys see my face now?
We could see both your face and the presentation.
Okay.
So yeah. There we go. Now it's just your.
So when you want to filter your wax, what I do is you can buy a maple syrup filter, which is a really thick, fuzzy kind of filter, or you can really just take a piece of sweatshirt material, you know, from like the thrift store, an old sweatshirt you have. And what I do is once my wax is melted, you take a container. If it's not for cosmetic grade wax, even those like 32-ounce large yogurt containers work pretty well. If it is for cosmetic grade things, then you want a glass or a metal container, and you're essentially making a filter for your wax. And so you put the sweatshirt material on top of your container, and you take a rubber band and you just secure it to the top of your container. And then you're just going to pour your wax over your sweatshirt filter. Once this is full, then you can pour it into, what I do is I just bought like silicone ice cube trays. You can get them, you know, at Target and Walmart. You can also buy molds. There's like little 1 ounce and 1 pound molds that say beeswax on them if you like. But anything that's silicone, it will be able to withstand the heat of the beeswax. Oh yeah, that's true. Cardboard milk cartons work, like, you know, the wax cartons. The other thing I've used is those plastic tofu blocks, because they're pretty shallow. You don't even have to spray them with a mold release or anything. They'll make like a pretty good little size block. I like the ice cube trays because they're a small piece. So if you're making just like a small project, just like a couple of candles, these melt really fast. But if you're looking, it kind of depends on how much wax you have that you're melting. Maybe you want a big block, and in that case, you could even pour it into a container like this or the milk carton and let it harden, and then just cut it and pull it out, and you have a big block. It really depends on how you want to store this and the uses that you're going to have for the wax. So once you fill up your container and you filter it, pour it into the ice cube trays or whatever mold you want to use and let it harden. And then you have some pretty clean wax. You can filter it again 1 or 2 more times, doing the same way, but instead of using a sweatshirt, you can use a thin cotton t-shirt. You know, old cotton t-shirts that you're not using anymore work just fine. And you can make your wax even just a little bit cleaner. For personal use, I haven't found that it's really necessary to filter it, you know, 2 or 3 times. But if you are going to start to sell your candles, the cleaner the wax, the cleaner the candle will burn. And so you know, you want your products to be as high quality as they possibly can be for when you're going to sell them. And so don't forget, I mean, here in Hawaii, it's pretty bad, but when storing beeswax, insects like to eat wax. I can't store my wax even in a shed. Cockroaches, all kinds of things will destroy even a big block of wax. You can store it in refrigerators and freezers, or even at the very least, like in a nice tight fitting container inside your house should be fine. So one thing I do want to mention is that beeswax is flammable. So there are people, you know, it's fine if you want to render your wax using a double boiler on the stove and not use the slow cooker, but you do want to use a double boiler, which is, you know, a container within a container. You don't want to put your beeswax over direct heat. And I don't, it's just, I am a messy person. The harder I try to not make a mess, the more of a mess I tend to make. So if you don't want little pieces of wax on your kitchen floor that start to turn into little sticky black and blackish gray blobs, or you don't want to have to deal with, you know, somebody complaining that you left a mess in the kitchen. And of course, you know, you don't want the smell of the beeswax, and you don't have a lot of windows in your kitchen to do this. I would really just do it with the slow cooker outside. Now, some people will also do boil it in a pot outside, and that is an option. You just really need to make sure you're out there and you are checking on it. It's really hard to regulate the heat on that, and beeswax is flammable, so it's usually just not something that I really recommend people to do, but it is another way that you will see some people doing things. And you know, keep in mind, beeswax is really, really hard to clean. You can put boiling water over it, but it will often just leave like a slight film over it. So make sure you're using materials that your husband or wife will not be yelling at you about come the next day. So this was one thing that it took me a little while to figure out, but if you do have that dark old comb, like maybe from your brood box, you can also use that. You know, beeswax varies in color, and so some people like those different shades of yellow, orange, brown for candles, but some people don't. I have a mold that is a pineapple, and so, you know, I don't want a brown pineapple as a candle. It just is not really what, you know, people want to buy. So if you have a lot of that dark comb and you would like to make it a lighter color wax, a really easy way to do that is to make a solar wax melter. And I made one in, you know, just 10 minutes. I took an old cooler, a bunch of leftover hardware cloth that I used to make a screened bottom, and glass from a broken picture frame to put on the top. And I have a YouTube video at the end of the presentation. I'll have the YouTube channel if you're interested to find it. But it's a really easy way to make a solar wax melter. It's not going to last as long as some of the other directions you'll find. You can make one out of wood that will last a lot longer if you have the time. I have a 2-year-old, so that was about as good as I was going to get. But what the solar wax melter does is you have the wax that melts below, but the propolis casings stay inside your basket up at the top of the melter. And so if you were to put your honeycomb that was darker brown into your slow cooker with the water, it just kind of melts into a little bit of a darker wax. And you do strain a lot out with the strainer with the sweatshirt, but it's still not as light as if you were to use the solar wax melter. So that's another thing to consider if you want those lighter candles. Now, another thing that I wanted to mention when cleaning wax is that you can if you have a lot of like casings and other things in your wax, before you use the sweatshirt to filter it, or if you have a lot of wax, you can just use a 5-gallon bucket. And what I do is I put a cheesecloth over my 5-gallon bucket. I hold it there with one of those elastic rubber bands, headbands. You know, they're a lot larger than a rubber band. They fit around a 5-gallon bucket, and that will collect if there was like bees and propolis casings in your wax. And so that you can collect that before you use the sweatshirt material. So that's something to do if your wax is really dirty or came from the brood section. And, you know, there's lots of uses for beeswax. There's lotions and salves and soap and chapstick, candles. Beeswax wraps are pretty popular item right now these days. You can use it for furniture, art projects. There is, you can unstick drawers with it. There is this, it's called Encaustic, and it is using beeswax almost as a way to paint, or you kind of paint it over an image, and it gives it a different kind of look to it. The farm I used to work for, they actually wallpapered the wall in their farm store with botanical prints and then did encaustic over it so that it had kind of like a vintage waxy look to it. And of course, there's no going back when you use beeswax on your kitchen utensils. So keep that in mind. Okay, so now that you have your clean beeswax, I was going to share a couple of candle projects with you that you can do from home. There's two real different kinds of containers. You got your candles, you have your container candles, and then you have your candles that you make from molds, or, you know, the freestanding candle, which could also be a candlestick. So if you want to make a container candle, I'll stop the screen share for a minute so you guys can see my face. If you want to make a container candle, you just keep in mind that you're usually not going to use just beeswax. You're going to use oil and a wax. And this is really because when you fill your container with wax, the wax is going to shrink, and it leaves a little bit of a gap between the wax and your container. Or it's also a lot more difficult to get the wax to cool without cracking. I mean, there are some tricks to it, but overall it's a lot easier to just add some oil to it. I usually add coconut oil, and it's about 1 pound of wax to a half a cup of coconut oil is what I do. And so the containers you can use are old candle containers are best, but you can also use, even if you have honey jars like this one, you just want to make sure it's not a jar that's really thin walled. You want to use a jar that is a little bit thicker walls, because you don't want this to break when it is burning. And so what you do is you want to melt your wax in oil. You can use your slow cooker for this. And then you want to prepare a wick. Now I'll get into later a little bit about like different wick sizes and stuff. But for now, you have a wick, which is really just a piece of string. And you can buy a little metal piece that goes down inside it to hold your wick. But what I do is I cut my string to be a few inches taller than the container. And then I just dip it into the wax. You dip it into the wax and then hold it straight like this. It'll make the wick really stiff. Once it's really stiff, you can put it into your container and it'll stand pretty straight up just like that. And then you just need something to hold it over your container. I use a lot of clothespins. If it's narrow enough, a bobby pin works really well. And if your container is wider, then you could use a popsicle stick or a chopstick, and you just want to wrap it around the stick. And so you're just, you know, keeping it hanging from the top of your jar. And so then when when your wax oil mixture is melted, you can pour it in. Once it's cool, you can take your clothespin off and trim the top of your wick. And so these container candles are pretty easy to make. Just make sure that you don't have your wick sitting on the bottom in your container. Give it a little bit of space, like at least 1/4 of an inch or so that it's not going all the way to the bottom. When you have your wick go all the way to the bottom, that's often a time that a candle can cause the glass to crack and break. And if your candle was left unattended or something, which, you know, it always says not to leave your candle unattended, but stuff happens. You really don't want that to happen. So the other kind of candle you can make that I was going to talk about is with a mold. I'm not going to get into candlesticks because they were never really a popular product for me with my business. I think it's just not a lot of people even have candlestick holders these days. I do, but it's not as common of a product that people ask for anymore. So to make a candle mold, I mean, it's very similar to the container candle, but it's going to be 100% beeswax. And what you do is you will take your mold and you just want to spray a mold release inside. As somebody who lives in Hawaii and can't get mold released shipped to them because it's an aerosol spray and they will not put that on a plane, I use just, you know, the cheap Costco oil spray. And a lot of my candle molds don't even require a spray because they're not a very large candle. But even, you know, like a 3-inch tall one, I don't usually have to use the mold release, but it makes it a little bit easier for it to pop out. So you can buy them at most of the beekeeping supply sites or candle making sites. And you would just spray that inside your mold and then you thread it. So your mold's going to have a little hole at the bottom. And so you don't have to put your wick inside the wax to make it stiff. You can just thread it inside the hole. I have a knitting needle that I use for this purpose so that I can easily get the wick through the hole. And it's just with the same thing, you keep the wick suspended up top using a clothespin. And there are a few extra tricks that you can find. You know, there's a ton of YouTube videos about how to make candles using a mold. But this is really just a quick tutorial so that you guys can see how easy it is. And once you pour your wax in, you really want it to be like 155 to 160 degrees. One of those laser thermometers are really good to gauge the temperature really fast. And if you put it in too hot, it can cause the candle to get these tunnels down at the bottom. If you put it in too cool, you'll often see these like lines across your candle, almost as if you're seeing where the wax was cooling as you were pouring it in. So you want to make sure your wax is not too hot and not too cool. And then once it is hardened, you can pop it out of your mold and trim the wicks. There are a lot of places you can buy candle molds, but you can also make your own mold. They'll be a one-time use, but those little yogurt cups make a great candle mold. You would be using it the same way you do the container candle. You would have to suspend the wick yourself on the top, but really just spray a little bit of mold release into the yogurt cup, pour your wax inside, and trim the wick when it's done. And then you can just take an X-Acto knife and cut that yogurt cup away, and you have like kind of like a little votive candle. You can also make pillars using the PVC pipe and a cap. I've done that before and it actually works really well. I even at one point just had lines on the outside of the PVC pipes so that if I wanted to make a 3-inch tall versus 4-inch tall candle, like where I knew where to stop pouring in the wax. You just want to, don't make your candle too tall in the PVC pipe because it can get stuck in there. And you really want to spray that one with mold release. Anything that isn't silicone is going to be a little bit more difficult to pop out. So you really want to use a lot of mold release so that it doesn't get stuck. If it does get stuck, you can put it in the freezer and that makes it a lot easier to pop out the beeswax. Go back to the presentation so you can see. So some of these candles here are from the molds that I made. What I like to do is for this one, let's see. On the upper left-hand side, I just made a candle from a 3-inch pillar mold and then sculpted beeswax of the Hawaiian late hula flower and honeybee over the candle, smushed it on it, and then made a mold from that. The upper right-hand one is just a votive from a regular beeswax candle mold, and then I just took a something pointing and carved aloha into the side. And then these two bottom ones, the one is actually a candle mold I made from like just a light bulb, like a real light bulb. I just thought it would be funny to make a candle shaped like a light bulb. And this other one on the bottom right is a salt shaker that I made a mold from. So if you want to really be creative and try some new stuff, then this is what I use to make my candle molds. It's not your only option, but if you want to make just a few, this is the only stuff I found that they sell in small quantities. This is called Umu 30 particularly, and you can find it on Amazon or Utrecht is usually where I purchase it from. A lot of art supply stores have it. And all you really have to do is you can either make something out of clay, you can make something out of beeswax, and then just coat it in a few layers of polyurethane. If it is something like the salt shaker that I used, that already had a pretty solid coating of something on it, and so that was just fine. You just want to make sure if anything is porous at all that you're coating it in polyurethane so that the silicone mold doesn't get absorbed by anything. And also you don't want, actually I think the main reason is you don't want any air to be released by it and to get into the silicone, or else you'll have a mold that has a whole bunch of bubbles, because I have seen that. And I will be releasing a video on our YouTube channel soon about how to make this. We already filmed it, but I just haven't put it up to the YouTube channel. So I mean, that's pretty easy to make. It doesn't really require too much. It's just that extra little step to make them. And this is about $30-some for the container, and it'll make one large candle mold or 2 or 3 smaller ones. So, oh, and one last thing. Okay, for the wicks, this does get a little confusing. In general, I tell people to just you want the 100% cotton square braided which is what a lot of wicks are. And then the number 4 is what's used for 2 to 3 inch wide candles often, and is really usually fine for a lot of standard candles that you're making. The containers can get a little tricky because it kind of depends on the opening of your jar and stuff. But if you're using a mold, the number 4 wick should be just fine. And if you're seeing like a little tunnel in your candle and it's not melting the full candle, then that means you need a bigger size. If it's smoking, then that means your wick's too big. So that's a general rule of thumb. You usually only need the number 4 and maybe a size above and below, and that's usually sufficient. And I actually have even made my own candle wicks. I don't anymore, but there's a friend of mine has cotton trees, and she cleaned the cotton and even like has a drop spindle and braided the cotton. And I mean, that works totally fine too. It burns a lot faster, so it's not an ideal wick for your candles, but I wouldn't get too caught up in making everything perfect. And you know, there's nothing wrong with playing around with things and trying new stuff. Just make sure you're using a fiber that's not, you know, like some kind of synthetic fiber that's going to just burn super fast, because then it's just kind of a waste of making that candle. You want something that's cotton and natural fibers. And so if you have a little bit less beeswax, or you want to make some lotions, I highly recommend it. I didn't really start making my own lotions until I was pregnant, and my skin on my belly was just growing so fast. I made up belly butter, and beeswax is just really great. It's really easy to make, and it's really hard to find lotions in the store that don't have alcohol in them. But if you make lotion yourself, you know, alcohol can really dry out your skin. But when you put beeswax in your products, it really locks in moisture. It protects your skin from the outside air. You don't have to add alcohol to it. And it has a pretty long shelf life. You can, especially actually if you even add a little bit of honey to it or vitamin E. And I mean, I've had body products that I've made last over a year and be just fine, which usually is longer than, you know, how long it takes for you to get through that jar. Just make sure you're using cosmetic grade wax. I mean, it's a little bit easier to talk about this with beekeepers because, you know, even if you're a backyard beekeeper with 1 or 2 hives, there's a chance that you're using a treatment, and that treatment is not healthy to be in wax that you're going to be putting in your skin. So if you purchase wax, make sure you're purchasing wax that is cosmetic grade. And here is a recipe I have that is a popular one that I sell. And really, if you do sell at farmers markets and stuff, I really highly recommend adding some body products, especially a chapstick. Chapsticks are almost always best sellers. Anything that costs under $5 is usually really popular at the markets. So here's a quick recipe that I have for body butter. I have shea butter, coconut oil, almond oil, some beeswax, sunflower oil, vitamin E. The essential oils are optional. I'm not really a fan of a lot of scents in my body products, but if you are, that's something you can add to it. So how you make body products, this is something I do inside my house. You want to make a double boiler, so you have your pot full of water, but then you're going to have your second container with your oils and beeswax in it. And I heat it up over medium heat. It kind of depends on the stove you're using, but usually medium heat is okay. I melt the wax first. And if you're going to be using beeswax for cosmetic use in these body products, I don't even fill some of these ice cube trays up all the way with my beeswax. I'll actually fill them up halfway, because then they're really thin and it's easy to snap the pieces of beeswax and really easy to measure. You know, one of those really small kitchen scales that's like 10 bucks at the store works really well for this purpose. And you can just snap those little pieces of beeswax and to get the amount that you need. Some people will use a cheese grater. You can do that. It's a little bit too messy for my liking and really destroys that cheese grater. It gets all clunked up and pretty fast. But another option, if you just need a teeny little amount. So once your beeswax is melted, you can add the butters and the other oils. And then once all of that is melted, you can take it off the heat. And then that's when you can add your vitamin E and pour it into your jars. Once it's in the jars, that's when I add the essential oil. I don't like to add it when it is all together. And you definitely don't want to add the essential oils when it's on the heat. That's something you do later. But since I don't add scents to all of my products, I'll make a big batch of a lotion and then add the oils to individual little batches. And you know, there's tons of body product recipes online and in books. Usually what you need to keep in mind is that you want the same ratio of oil to butter and beeswax. So if it's a body butter, then there's probably going to be more butter to oil and a teeny amount of beeswax. If it's for your face or a healing salve, there's going to be more oil. You don't have to get too caught up in having all of those ingredients in the recipe, because sometimes that can get really expensive, having like, you know, 2 ounces of mango butter and 5 ounces of shea butter and cocoa butter and all of these different things. So if you have a lot of cocoa butter left over, and you know, there is a little bit of a shelf life to these things, you can use it instead of shea butter or mango butter and these other butters. Almond oil, coconut oil, sunflower oil, avocado oil, olive oil, all of these oils, you know, they all pretty much have similar beneficial properties. Some of them vary a little bit, but if you're just looking for, you know, a nice lotion or something or a present for people, I haven't really found that there's a huge difference in using one versus the other. My go-tos for oil are almond oil, coconut oil, and jojoba oil. Some are better for dry skin versus sensitive skin. Some are known for healing scars. So if you want something in particular, then definitely just Google what you're looking for in your product, and it'll tell you what oil is the best oil to use. And as far as the butters are concerned, mango butter is a really good one to use. It doesn't have an odor to it, and it's really good for dry skin. It doesn't have as long of a shelf life. It's only about 6 months. So that is one thing to keep in mind if you don't think you're going to be using it that quickly. But if you want to make a lot of products to give out as gifts for people, that's a good one. Cocoa butter has a longer shelf life, but if you've never smelled cocoa butter, it's got a very definite smell. Some people love the scent of it, but it does have a strong smell. So if you're not a big fan of strong smells, I would not go with that one. And to choose mango butter or shea butter. Shea butter is a lot softer. So if you want a body butter that's a little bit more spreadable, then that's the one that I would go with. It kind of melts on contact with your skin as soon as you touch it. And that shelf life of shea butter is like 12 months. So a little bit longer. But if you don't think you'll be using a lot right away, then you might want to go with the cocoa butter. And if you want to get more into making body products, past the basics of, you know, the hand lotion and the face and body lotion, the next step is to infuse herbs into these oils before you add them in. So I'm going to get into that because that's a little bit like a whole nother presentation, but something to keep in mind if you're looking to start an herbal garden, you know, comfrey is a good one to start with. And there's a lot of great books out there for how to start your medicinal garden and start infusing them in your oils. And so that's the end of my talk about beeswax and some of the uses you can that there are for it. I have a podcast called The Buzz About Bees. You can find on anywhere you find podcasts. And our YouTube channel is Beekeeping Made Simple. You just go to YouTube and put that into the search. We're starting a whole bunch of videos about beeswax crafts. And we just finished a little series about ways that you can make an income from your honeybees and your hives, whether that is through honey or taking care of bees for people, or making some candles and other beeswax crafts. And the other thing I wanted to tell you guys about is our blog. That's at the website beekeepingmadesimple.com. So this is our most recent project, and it's really just gathering all this information about beekeeping from, I started a bee association here on the Big Island a few years ago and working for commercial apiaries to just kind of break down the beekeeping process. I just have it according to different topics like beginner, advanced, business of beekeeping, so that it's a little bit easier for people, especially those getting started, to not be so overwhelmed by all the content out there. I think it's really easy to see all of these beekeeping topics and to think you need to know it all right away at the start. And you know, that's not true. And it is a shame when a lot of people put off beekeeping for so many years because they think that it's too much for them, when really they're looking into advanced stuff before they even really need to know about that advanced topics. So if you want to be notified about these beeswax craft videos that we'll be putting out, and our other beekeeping educational stuff, the website is beekeepingmadesimple.com/blog, and we have our newsletter sign up at the end of all of those pages. And I'll stop the share now. There we go.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Larissa. We have several questions for you, so I'll read those out for you from the chat. If anybody else has questions, feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A section. You can also just say in the chat that you want to be able to ask your question live, and I am very happy to let you turn on your camera and your mic. Just let me know. All right, so the first question is, do you have problems with plastic deforming and glass shattering when you add hot wax? Because you mentioned using like plastic containers for the filtering process.
Oh yeah, good question. You don't want to, definitely don't heat up your beeswax too hot. So if you are going to use, I don't have issues with the plastic yogurt containers deforming and melting. Definitely keep your beeswax no higher than 200. If you use those, like any kind of thing that heats up your wax where you can't control the temperature, that is definitely going to be a problem. And you know, those little yogurt containers, you really want to make sure you're not heating those up too high because they're not as thick of a plastic. You really want like a thicker plastic like these containers. You don't want to use a really, like, you know, like a water bottle thickness plastic. You don't want to use that, and you don't want to use glass that has thin walls either. The canning jars seem to work just fine, and some honey jars, but like I wouldn't put it in, you know, any like thin walled little, I've seen like in shot glasses and stuff, some of those glass are really thin and those can shatter as well.
Got it. Yeah. So I guess if you wanted to be extra safe and you're not sure of the temperature of your wax, it probably makes sense to use either cardboard or silicone, like you said, the silicone ice cube trays or metal or something like that.
Mhm.
Wolfgang had a comment about a study by Christopher Mullen, published a list of agrochemicals found in beeswax. As the chemicals diffuse from the collected pollen into the wax, for some pesticides, the ratio between concentrations in the brood wax was 80 times higher than in the pollen. So it's like the wax is just sucking up the pesticides.
Yeah, it's so porous. You really want to be careful. I don't use anything from the brood. I know that formic acid is like some of the formic treatments, it's okay to consume the honey, but I just I always go on the more cautious side. I don't even put any of the formic in my hive if I'm going to be harvesting honey, and I do the same for my beeswax. I really just, after getting pregnant and having a baby, and I think if I want to do it for myself or for my child, then I'm just not going to do it for anybody.
Phil Staub asked, can you make crayons? Have you heard of anybody ever making crayons from beeswax?
That question makes me so happy. I have made so many crayons with beeswax. What an obscure question, but I'm so glad you asked that. I've just had some trouble with red and purple. I can, turmeric is okay, so I've tried to make crayons with natural dyes. Turmeric does a great job making crayons, and so does coffee and activated charcoal for the browns and blacks, and green I use spirulina. There is, I can email this to you later. I have a recipe for it. You can't use pure beeswax. It's too hard. It's a beeswax plus carnauba wax, or I can't remember. It's another kind of wax plus tallow is what I've used. It's a little bit of a tricky recipe because you want it to slide well so that you can use it. But I do have a recipe if anyone's interested.
Larissa, is your contact information on your website, on the blog?
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So Phil, if you check out her blog, you can get her contact information and she can send you that recipe. Elodie asked, can you please repeat the proportions of wax to coconut oil? I think that was the, if your candle recipe.
I use 1 pound of wax to a half a cup of coconut oil. Some people just do half and half. But that's the ratio that I use.
And are you using like the refined coconut oil so it doesn't add like the coconut smell to the wax, or do you use the unrefined stuff?
I use whatever I found like Costco.
Okay.
Like the big tool. I don't sell my container candles because I'm kind of a little bit of a purist when it comes to beeswax. Beeswax is the only wax that actually purifies the air. And all of those other waxes, I'm not sure soy wax is bad for the air quality. Paraffin candles are, like the worst. They're like releasing diesel exhaust into your house. But beeswax candles are good to, they help cause like dust and allergens to fall out of the air. And so I prefer to not combine my wax with oil that then makes it not good for your air quality. So I don't know a ton about the container candles, but yeah, I just use the tub from Costco. It's $20 for like that big container.
Got it. Cool. And then Peter asked, how much vitamin E do you add? I think that was for your hand solve recipe.
I'm never very specific about the vitamin E. I use like those, you can buy those little capsules even, and you just squirt like a handful of them into it. It's a teeny little amount, and it's actually not even completely necessary. It can help extend the shelf life, but isn't even really something you have to add.
Got it. Cool. And we had a question from the Q&A. Sorry, wrong page. How much wax do you need for a 3x3 or a 4x4 pillar? It's like a math question.
A 3x3 or 4x4 what?
Pillar. So a 3" by 3" or 4" by 4" pillar candle.
Well, if you're going to make a 3x3 or a 4x4 inch pillar, you want to at least have a pound of wax melting in there because you're going to need extra. If you melt just that teeny little amount, some's going to get stuck in the slow cooker, some's going to get stuck in your filter. Just make more. And also, don't go through all the effort to burn all that wax just to make one candle. Make a couple.
I hate to be a smartass too, but it depends on the height of the candle, right? Like it's length times width times height. So it depends on how tall of a pillar you want.
Well, if you have your mold, you can always take a block of wax and hold it up to your candle. But I always melt a whole lot more than what I need. I usually just line the heating element part of the slow cooker with the wax so that it melts faster.
Got it. Cool. It looks like that is the end of the questions. Thank you so much for giving us that presentation. It was very informative. We haven't had anybody talk about candle making, at least since I've been a member. So that was really great.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Nice to meet you. I guess I can't really see anyone else's face. But yeah, I hope you guys check out the podcast, The Buzz About Bees. It's really not a beekeeping how-to. It's just kind of about talking to beekeepers and learning how the hive works.